Religion is a fascinating phenomenon. For some, it provides solace in difficult moments and gives them strength to move forward. Yet for others, it's a convenient pretext to indulge their sadistic inclinations. Just recall the times of the Holy Inquisition. During that era, thousands of people accused of heresy or witchcraft were burned at the stake. Thousands more were tortured in dark dungeons, hundreds of whom became disabled for life. But if you think we're trying to accuse Christianity of excess cruelty, now, well, no, absolutely not. The ancient religions of the Celts, Carthaginians, Romans, and Aztecs were so much more brutal that Christianity seems harmless in comparison. And now, you'll learn why the Aztecs wore clothing made from the skin of their victims. Why did a woven man strike terror into the Romans? And how did gladiatorial combat, originally a form of sacrifice, turn into a bloody sport? The Aztecs were a fairly advanced civilization. They had their own logographic writing systems, technologies, culture, and occupied a quite large territory. Yet despite all this, the Aztecs are best known for their brutal religion. According to some estimates, throughout their history, the Aztecs sacrificed around 136,000 people to the gods, although this figure is often disputed. However, historians agree on one thing. The scale of Aztec sacrifices was unmatched in all of America, and possibly even in the world. And you might immediately ask, why did the Aztec gods demand worship in the form of sacrifices? The Aztec religion was based on the belief that the entire world was created through the sacrifice of the gods, meaning each one of them gave some part of themselves to create mountains, trees, animals, and humans. Moreover, every living being contained energy necessary for the god's sustenance. Thus, by performing sacrifice rituals, the Aztecs were primarily repaying their debt to their creators and only secondarily asking the spirits for blessings and favors. The particularly cruel gods demanded human blood, and a simple quick death wasn't enough for them. For example, one of the most famous Aztec sacrifices is no less gruesome than the Scandinavian blood eagle, which we've discussed in another video. But unlike the blood eagle, this sacrifice was certainly not a myth. The victim was first painted blue, then led to the top of the pyramid where a priest awaited. The captive was placed on a stone table, and the priest, using an obsidian knife, cut open the victim's chest and ritually removed their heart while they were still alive. Sometimes, this ritual took on a theoretical aspect, involving a duel between the priest and the victim with knives. However, the priest wielded a real blade while the victim had a feathered imitation and was tied to a stone. This formality was likely due to the fact that some gods only accepted sacrifices of those killed in combat. And although this ritual is the most well-known, it's not the cruelest or most elaborate of the Aztec ceremonies. The god of fire, Cruelty, demanded a special approach, which is why he had his own ritual of sacrifice. To accomplish this, prisoners were chosen as sacrifices. They were seated around the fire and smoked with narcotic plants. Once the intoxication reached its peak, a priest approached the victim and placed them on the altar. The priest performed a ritual dance, after which they threw the victim into the fire. In their narcotic stupor, the person did not immediately realize they were in the flames, and when they attempted to escape, it was clumsily done, often hindered by the priest. After some time, still alive, the prisoner was removed from the fire for the final stage. The priest would open the victim's chest with an obsidian knife and ritually extract the heart alive as an offering to the gods. Often, in addition to carving out the heart from the already deceased prisoner, their skin was removed and their internal organs could be consumed by the priest. The skin was then used to make ritual costumes. For instance, these costumes were worn during ceremonies of accolades. These were Aztec celebrations during which warriors who captured prisoners were awarded various parts of their bodies. Later, the warrior could proudly wear these trophies, which proved his strength and high status in the tribe. Human sacrifices were quite routine events among the peoples of North and South America. Unfortunately, in these communities, human life was considered insignificant compared to the benefits a sacrifice could bring, and the sacrifice that the gods made to create the world. Thanks to this belief, an implicit scale was formed to assess how vulnerable a sacrifice was to the gods. For example, according to Inca beliefs, captives and slaves held little value to the spirits as they were not part of their faith and culture, and thus could not properly enter the spirit world. For this reason, as an offering to the spirits, they chose the most valuable thing they had: children. Not just any children, but the sons and daughters of chiefs, priests, and shamans. Most likely, the gift was chosen from birth and prepared for the ritual throughout their short lives. The main stage of preparation began about a month before the ritual. The chosen ones were fed the best food, washed every day, and additionally, a responsible member of the tribe was assigned to fulfill every desire of the future victim. When the priest decided the offering was ready, there were two known versions of the ritual. The first method involved taking the victim to a temple at the top of the Andes. There, they would be decapitated, and the main part of the ritual would be completed. The other method of sacrifice was less brutal but no less horrific. The victim was drugged with narcotic herbs, then placed in a tomb 1.5 meters underground, and the exit was sealed. After this ritual, the bodies of the victims were often very well preserved. For example, in 1999, the mummified bodies of 3 Inca children were found. Through research, scientists determined that the ritual occurred around the year 1500. And even though all the victims died in their sleep without unnecessary pain and suffering, the ritual remains horrifying and inhumane. But the ancestors of Europeans were no less cruel than the indigenous peoples of South America. Although sacrifices in European countries were less common, they were distinguished by their particular cruelty. Gaius Julius Caesar described cruel religious rituals in his manuscripts. He mentioned the Gauls as a very devout people, which led to the belief that immortal gods could only be appeased with human sacrifice. The text specifically mentioned a ritual known as the Wicker Man. The essence of the ritual was the construction of a colossus resembling a human out of straw and wood. Livestock and wild animals were placed inside this colossus. However, if there weren't enough animals to fill the colossus to the top, the Gauls would also place captured people inside, usually prisoners or slaves. The historian did not specify whether the people and animals placed inside the statue were alive, but it is known that after the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, some captured legionnaires were burned alive in wooden cages. This leads us to believe that in the case of the Wicker Man, all victims were alive at the beginning of the ritual. However, modern historians are skeptical about the existence of such a ritual for two main reasons. Firstly, the only source mentioning the Wicker Man is Caesar's writings. Secondly, the Romans often enjoyed slandering their enemies to dehumanize them. Therefore, the ritual could have been a fabrication. So whether to believe in the existence of this ritual or not is your choice. By the way, if you think that Celtic peoples were the first to whom the Romans attributed sacrificial rituals, you'd be far from correct. These guys loved spreading rumors about the barbaric customs of their enemies. For example, the sacrifices of the Carthaginians are also known mainly through Roman sources. But did the Carthaginians really perform such rituals? Let's find out. The religion of the Carthaginians, like all others on our list, was polytheistic, and the pantheon was headed by 2 supreme gods, Tanit and Baal-Hamon, with the latter so fond of sacrifices that the Carthaginians simply could not refuse him. Most often, rituals honoring the gods of the Punic pantheon were conducted in a manner familiar to us, with the slaughter of horned cattle. But this belief had an interesting feature. Only male animals were offered as sacrifices to the gods. Most likely, this was related to the status of the supreme goddess Tanit, as her example illustrates the Carthaginians' particular reverence for the motherhood and fertility. However, this can also be explained not only by religious reasons, but also by the fact that females were more useful in the long run and more valuable, since in addition to meat, a cow could provide milk and offspring. However, sometimes for a good harvest and victories in wars, sacrificing livestock was not enough, and then they had to resort to extreme measures. Roman historians describe how children were often involved in Punic rituals. However, this information is disputed by many modern historians, as it seems more like Roman propaganda against Carthage. But it's worth mentioning that not only the literature of the Roman mentions sacrifices in Carthage. Greeks also wrote about it, and there are even descriptions of these rituals in the Bible. So whether to believe in this or not is up to you. But by the way, guess who loves accusing their neighbors of human sacrifice rituals the most while having such rituals themselves? Correct, the Romans themselves. Like many stories about the Romans, this one begins with them borrowing ideas from their neighbors. The origin of gladiatorial combat dates back to an Etruscan funeral ritual. Modern archaeological excavations near Tarquinia in Italy, an ancient Etruscan settlement, fully support this theory. Frescoes and Etruscan tombs depict ritual games in honor of the deceased, with human sacrifices taking center stage. Initially, the Etruscans, like the ancient Greeks, simply killed several prisoners during their funeral rites of a renowned hero or nobleman. Later, they armed 2 prisoners and forced them to fight to the death. This spectacle eventually became public entertainment. The Etruscans had circuses and arenas, which the Romans adopted. The first recorded gladiatorial games in Rome occurred in 264 BC, during the funeral of Decimus Junius Brutus Pera, a direct descendant of Rome's founders, a renowned aristocrat and politician. To honor his memory, 3 pairs of gladiators fought to the death in the castle forum. Such rituals continued among the Romans for a long time, until over time, what started as a simple sacrificial ritual evolved into a true blood sport. Gladiator schools began to emerge, and gladiatorial games became more grandiose and spectacular. By the way, in the Roman Empire, death in the arena was not the inevitable outcome of gladiatorial combat, as movies often depict. Gladiators often became something like modern MMA stars. Hundreds watched their performances. Women adored them. They were trained by the best coaches. And after a successful career, gladiators could retire and live splendidly. But here's another story. If you want to learn more about the lives of gladiators, feel free to write about it in the comments. Also, do you think that all ancient world residents truly believed in the necessity of sacrifices? Or were they just following the whims of priests and kings? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to discuss this with you. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.